I've never been the kind of person who drew a crowd. At school events, family dinners, birthday parties, even funerals, I was the one sitting quietly in the corner, observing while everyone else performed. That's not bitterness talking, it's just fact. Some people enter a room and pull gravity toward them. My younger sister was one of those people. Me? I was the wallpaper. Pleasant, pale, and easy to ignore. Growing up, it became clear early on who the star of our family was. Madison had this effortless charm, golden curls, perfect dimples, and a laugh that could melt stone. By the time she was 12, my parents were already referring to her as our little queen. Meanwhile, I stayed tucked in the background, clutching library books and learning to be grateful for the crumbs of attention I got. I suppose that's what made today feel so familiar. Madison's wedding was an event, capital E. The venue was a sprawling vineyard estate nestled just outside the city, with white roses spilling from every archway and violinists playing near the fountain. I arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a slate blue dress I'd bought months ago during a quiet afternoon in a thrift boutique. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't new. But it fit me well, simple, structured, understated. Like me. No one noticed when I walked in. The front garden was full of people, guests in designer gowns, champagne flutes clinking, air kisses, and curated smiles. I spotted my parents near the floral arch, radiant and already glowing with pride. My mother was in emerald green satin, practically vibrating with excitement as she chatted about her Madison. My father, ever the charming host, had his arm linked with one of the bride's future in-laws. I stood a few paces away, waiting for a glance, a nod, something. But their eyes skipped right over me. I greeted my aunt, who blinked twice before remembering my name. A cousin gave me a passing compliment on my dress, then quickly pivoted to gossip about the open bar. I found my seat on the edge of the aisle and sat down alone. I wish I could say it surprised me, but it didn't. I watched as Madison floated through the crowd like a crowned swan, hugging, laughing, pausing perfectly for photos. Her hair was swept into an elegant chignon, her makeup flawless. The entire day had been crafted to highlight her beauty, her moment. And she deserved to feel beautiful, truly. But watching her surrounded by admiration while I sat unnoticed made something hollow ache inside my chest. It wasn't jealousy. Not quite. More like the ghost of being forgotten, a wound I'd gotten used to covering up with politeness. Madison and I used to be close when we were little. There were nights we whispered secrets under shared blankets, made up silly songs, played games in the backyard. But somewhere around the age of 15, she outgrew me. And the world, our parents included, seemed to agree. By the time I graduated college with a double major, she was already being scouted by modeling agencies. I once tried to show my father a story I got published in a literary magazine. He skimmed the first paragraph, then changed the subject to Madison's upcoming magazine shoot. I smiled and folded the pages quietly back into my bag. Years of that will teach you to shrink yourself without even realizing it. So here I was, the invisible sister, present at the biggest day of her life, wearing a nice dress, smiling gently at people who didn't really see me. And I didn't want to ruin anything. Truly, I didn't. I came out of love, out of duty. Out of that tiny, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would look at me and say, "I'm glad you're here." No one did. Instead, I sat through the pre-ceremony buzz, the rustle of silk and murmured names, feeling like background noise in someone else's carefully directed film. And still I smiled. I nodded. I stayed quiet. That was always the role I was assigned. I was just here to smile, nod, and disappear. That was always the role I was assigned. The night before the wedding was supposed to be warm and celebratory. That's what rehearsal dinners are for, right? A chance to toast, share memories, clink glasses, and laugh under fairy lights while the couple-to-be glows in the spotlight. And Madison certainly glowed. The venue was a high-end rooftop restaurant with an open-air terrace and string lights crisscrossing above us, like some Pinterest dreamscape. Tables were set with gold-rimmed plates and peonies in low vases. Everyone was dressed to impress, sipping imported wine and nibbling on hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than my rent. I wore a navy dress with flutter sleeves and tried to blend in as usual. I had rehearsed a simple toast in my head. Something sweet and short about sisterhood, how even though we were different, I was proud of her. I never got to say it, because Madison had other plans. After dinner, when the speeches began, the mic was passed from friend to cousin to parent. Toasts were heartfelt, light, full of the kind of easy love that families display in public. Then it was Madison's turn. She stood tall in a deep red dress that clung to her like it had been sewn onto her skin. Her nails sparkled, her voice rang clear, and her smile was wide and practiced. Everyone leaned in. I sipped my drink and tried not to anticipate anything. But when her eyes landed on me, I should have known. She started light, thanking everyone, especially the groom, her rock and protector, who smiled up at her like a man completely in love. Then she pivoted to stories. Childhood anecdotes. Family jokes. It was charming, until it wasn't. And of course, she said, giggling, what would a wedding be without my favorite plus one? My sister. People laughed. I smiled, a little confused. She's always been there, in her quiet little way. You know, the smart one. The one who reads books no one understands and wears shoes that say, I give up. Louder laughter this time. Even my uncle slapped the table. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a chuckle. I could feel heat blooming up my neck. She's our family's mystery box, Madison continued. Still unopened. Still, waiting for someone to figure out what's inside. I mean, she's 32 and single, so clearly no one's cracked the code. Roaring laughter now. I felt it in my chest, like a punch I wasn't ready for. She went on calling me the philosopher, poking fun at the way I always bring a book to dinner like it's a pet, joking that maybe the bouquet toss would be my big break. Everyone laughed. Except me. I sat there frozen, smiling like it didn't hurt, like it was all in good fun. I even laughed, a dry, hollow sound that didn't belong to me. Because what was I supposed to do? Stand up and shout at the bride? Storm out and cause a scene? No, that's not who I was. Instead, I excused myself halfway through dessert. Said something about a headache and needing to rest before the big day. Madison blew me a kiss as I walked out. I took the elevator down to the street, then walked 3 blocks before I realized I had no idea where I was going. The city lights blurred around me, and I suddenly felt like a child again, the forgotten one, standing in the shadows while the world cheered for someone else. I ended up at a small bench near a closed flower stall, staring at the night sky. My chest felt tight. Not because of the jokes themselves, they weren't even clever, but because no one stopped her. No one said, hey, maybe don't humiliate your sister during your wedding speech. No one pulled her aside. No one even looked uncomfortable. They just laughed at me. I thought about all the times I had been her confidant, the one who stayed up late listening to her cry about breakups, the one who loaned her money when she couldn't pay rent, the one who never asked for anything in return except kindness. And she repaid me with a punchline. Later that night, back in the guest room of my parents' house, I stood in front of the mirror. I hadn't taken off my dress. My eyes were red. My lipstick had faded into a blur. I stared at the reflection, tired, small, and entirely invisible, and something inside me cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a soft, final snap. I realized I'd been handing out passes for years, letting things slide, forgiving slights, swallowing my own hurt for the sake of peace. And what did I get in return? Laughter. From people I thought loved me. I leaned in closer to the mirror, touched the corner of my lip, and whispered something I'd never allowed myself to say before. No more. That night, I looked in the mirror and promised myself no more silence. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and golden, the kind of light that filters through gauzy curtains like a whispered promise. I arrived early at the Vineyard estate, wanting to help, not out of duty, but because part of me still wanted to feel like I belonged. Like I had a place in the story unfolding. I wore the same slate blue dress from the day before, freshly pressed, paired with low heels and soft curls. Nothing flashy. Just clean and composed, my usual armor. The bridal suite was chaos. Laughter, perfume, curling irons, mimosas, a pastel whirlwind of bridesmaids buzzing around Madison, who sat regally in a robe embroidered with Mrs. on the back. I stepped in quietly, smiled, and said, "Need a hand?" No one looked up. I hovered for a moment before repeating myself, this time louder. Madison turned, raising an eyebrow. "Oh," she said, almost startled. "You're here. That's nice." One of her bridesmaids, a tall brunette with lip gloss so thick it reflected light, added with a smirk, "We've got it covered. Don't want to crumple your dress before the show, right?" The group giggled. I nodded politely, stepped back into a corner of the room, and busied myself checking the seating chart on the clipboard. That seemed safe. Neutral. Then came the whispers. "I'm honestly shocked she showed up after last night. Do you think she's mad?" "Mad? Please. She's too spineless to be mad. She's like a background actor in her own life. You ever notice that?" I stood perfectly still. They weren't even trying to lower their voices. Maybe they thought I couldn't hear them. Or maybe, more likely, they knew I could and just didn't care. That's what hurt the most. Not the words, but the casual cruelty of being spoken about like furniture. I turned around to leave, quietly, when one of the stylists, a young man in a vest with too many pins attached, breezed by me with a glass of champagne in hand. "Careful, sweetheart," he called over his shoulder just as he bumped into me. The glass tilted. Liquid splashed down the front of my dress in a golden arc. "Oh no," he said, more amused than apologetic. "Oops. Guess that's what happens when you stand too close to the action." He looked me up and down and added with a wink, although honestly, it's not like it makes much of a difference. Laughter again. A few of the bridesmaids actually clapped. I didn't move. Not for a second. I stared at the champagne-soaked fabric clinging to my torso and thought, of course. Because when you're invisible, even accidents become jokes. Even humiliation gets served with a smile. I said nothing. I turned, walked calmly out the door, and down the hall like nothing had happened. No drama. No confrontation. Just silence. But inside, something had shifted. Quietly. Firmly. I didn't cry on the way home. Not this time. I moved with clarity, each step steady and deliberate. I went straight to my bedroom, kicked off the shoes, peeled off the damp dress, and opened the cedar trunk at the foot of my bed. Inside lay a garment wrapped in tissue, ivory satin, hand-sewn beading, delicate lace sleeves. My grandmother's wedding gown. She had worn it in 1953, and it had been preserved like a treasure ever since. She was the only person in our family who ever truly saw me. While others told Madison she was destined for crowns and stages, Grandma used to whisper to me, "Your power is quiet, but never mistake it for weakness." I had never worn the dress. It always felt too sacred, too bold. But today, I needed to remember her. And I needed to remember me. I slid the gown over my skin, felt the cool fabric hug my waist, the sleeves brushing against my arms like a second skin. I pinned my hair into a soft twist, added a vintage brooch Grandma once gave me, and looked in the mirror. This time, I didn't see someone small or forgettable. I saw presence. Grace. Strength without volume. And no, I didn't do it to upstage Madison. This wasn't about revenge or attention. This was about finally refusing to disappear. When I returned to the vineyard an hour later, the ceremony was moments from starting. Guests milled about, soft music floated from the string quartet, and heads turned as I stepped through the rose-lined gate. But I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize for being seen. Then Madison appeared at the top of the aisle. She was radiant, I won't lie. A vision in white satin, cinched at the waist, with a cathedral-length veil cascading behind her. She smiled, practiced, poised, perfect. The crowd turned toward her like sunflowers. But she didn't smile for long. As she neared the front row, her eyes swept the crowd and stopped on me. I didn't look away. For one suspended second, our gazes locked. Her expression didn't break, not publicly. But her eyes flared slightly, her jaw tensed, and then she leaned to one of her bridesmaids and whispered something that made both of them exchange sharp glances. I could guess the words. What is she wearing? Why is she here? I didn't care. The ceremony continued. Vows were spoken, hands were held, rings exchanged. I watched it all like a calm observer, the weight of my dress grounding me like a second spine. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was simply done playing invisible. Then something shifted. As the officiant called for the rings, I felt another pair of eyes on me. I looked up and met his gaze. The groom. He was tall, well-groomed, and had the steady expression of someone trained to smile through nerves. But in that moment, his smile faltered. His eyes, warm and amber-colored, locked onto mine. His brow furrowed, not in confusion, but in quiet recognition. He didn't look away immediately. He held the glance, even as the bride slipped the ring onto his finger. It wasn't romantic. Not flirtatious. Something else entirely. It was like he really saw me, and was startled by what was there. Maybe he noticed the dress. Maybe he remembered stories Madison had told. Maybe, despite the whirlwind of events around him, he recognized the stillness in me, the woman who hadn't demanded attention, hadn't competed for it, but had earned it anyway. And I felt it. The shame. The familiarity of it. That same hot flush I'd felt the night before at the rehearsal dinner, sitting frozen while everyone else laughed at my expense like I was the punchline of a joke I'd never agreed to be in. Only this time, it wasn't veiled. There was no pretend sweetness in her tone now, just thinly masked contempt, coated in charm and dressed up for an audience. A sharp gasp came from one of the tables near the front. Someone murmured, "That was too much." But Madison didn't seem to hear it. She had the mic. She had the power. And for whatever reason, she needed to use it to prove that even here, even now, she could control the narrative. I stood up slowly. Not dramatically. Not with stomping feet or shaking hands. Just stood. My chair scraped softly against the wooden floor. I didn't say anything. Didn't cry. Didn't look at her again. I turned and walked through the crowd, through sequins and perfume and silence, suddenly stretching in every direction. I felt their eyes on me. Felt the weight of their discomfort as I passed. Someone whispered my name. I didn't turn. I reached the double doors and pushed them open gently. The cool night air met my skin like a balm. I stepped out into the quiet, my heels tapping softly against the stone steps, heart steady, breath even. I could still hear the music inside, muffled, distant, like the tail end of a bad memory trying to follow me out. And then, a sound behind me. Not footsteps. Not a voice. Not the shuffle of awkward applause. But the distinct, metallic clatter of a microphone hitting the floor. And that's when I heard the mic drop, but not from her. The night air was cool against my skin, crisp with vineyard breeze and the scent of distant lavender. I walked past the marble steps, through the gravel path, down toward the parking area, not quite sure where I was headed, just away. Away from the music. Away from the stairs. Away from her. The champagne in my stomach had curdled, and my heels clicked like a metronome marking time I'd wasted. I had almost reached the corner of the estate when I heard them footsteps. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just deliberate. I didn't turn right away. For a moment, I let the sound follow me. I wondered if it was some distant guest, or maybe a cousin sent to retrieve me with an apology that would mean nothing. But then a voice called out, low and even. Wait. I stopped. Turned. It was him, the groom. He wasn't running. He wasn't breathless. He just walked until he stood a few feet from me, his hands in his pockets, his tie slightly loosened. The celebration behind him glowed like a different world. He studied me for a moment. Not unkindly. Not like I was a spectacle or an obligation. Just like I was a person. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. For what exactly? He looked toward the lit-up vineyard, where the laughter had already resumed. For all of it. The jokes. The way they treat you. The fact that you had to walk out of your own sister's wedding just to protect your dignity. I didn't respond. My hands were folded, steady. I wasn't interested in theatrics. He went on, slower now. I've seen how she talks about you when you're not in the room. I always thought, maybe it was just sister stuff. But tonight, watching you stand there while she did that, I realized it wasn't about teasing. It was about power. His words sank like stones. I looked at him, really looked at him, this man who had just married my sister, who should have been smiling for photos and clinking glasses, not standing here with me in the dark. And you married her anyway, I said softly. He exhaled. I know. There was a long pause. Not tense, just full. He glanced at the ground, then back up at me. That dress, he said, voice quiet. It's not something you forget. The way you walked in today, it wasn't loud, but the whole room shifted. And I think that's what scared her. My heart twisted. He wasn't flirting. There was no trace of attraction in his voice. Just something else entirely, something I hadn't received in a very long time. Respect. Admiration. Recognition. She wanted you to feel small, he said. But you didn't give her that satisfaction. I saw the way you held your ground. Like you were used to carrying things heavier than anyone else in that room ever would be. I swallowed hard. He stepped back a little, and that's when he did something unexpected. In front of the open doors, where a few guests had wandered out for air and now paused to watch, he gave a small bow. A full, deliberate, respectful bow. Ma'am, he said, his voice steady and clear. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't performative. It was reverent. It was everything she hadn't been. A few gasps echoed faintly from the terrace. Someone whispered. Another took out their phone, too slow to catch the moment. But none of that mattered. For the first time in a very long time, I felt seen, not pitied, not tolerated, but acknowledged. I stepped forward, closed the distance between us by half. I don't need your apology, I said gently. But I appreciate your words. He nodded. And the wedding? I asked, not bitter, just curious. He hesitated, eyes distant. I keep thinking, he said, maybe I loved the idea of her more than the truth of her. But I walked too far down the aisle to stop now. I nodded slowly. It wasn't my place to tell him what to do. He was a grown man, and the road ahead was his own to walk. I reached out, touched his sleeve once, a simple gesture, not affection, but finality. Take care of yourself, I said. And don't lose sight of what you saw tonight. I won't, he said. As I turned to go, the sounds of the party resumed behind us, music, laughter, a new round of champagne toasts. But it all felt miles away now. I didn't need a spotlight. I didn't need a scene. I'd come to support my sister. She tried to humiliate me. But instead, someone stood in front of the entire room and reminded me that I had never needed to raise my voice to command presence. She tried to humiliate me. But he gave me back my name. It's strange how a single moment can change the entire temperature of your life. It's been a few weeks since the wedding, and though the flowers have wilted and the photos have likely been edited and framed, the shockwaves are still circling through my family like ripples on a pond no one wants to acknowledge. They haven't called. Not my mother. Not my father. Certainly not Madison. I suppose I should feel hurt by that, but I don't. There's a clarity that comes after you stop begging for scraps. After you stop hoping they'll see you. After you finally realize that shrinking yourself into silence was never noble, only convenient, for them. From what I've heard, and people do love to talk when they think you're no longer part of the fold, the honeymoon never happened. There were murmurs about a delay, followed by whispers of separate flights, and then finally a photograph surfaced of Madison at a resort alone, drink in hand, smile brittle. Someone at my work forwarded me a post from her Instagram with the caption, "Learning to love myself in solitude." Which, I suppose, was her way of spinning the story before someone else did. There's no official announcement. No public drama. But those closest to the family say the annulment paperwork was quietly filed by the end of the second week. I haven't spoken to him, not since that night. And I didn't expect to. But 3 days ago, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Just my name, in clean handwriting, on a cream envelope that looked oddly formal among the clutter of bills and coupons. I opened it cautiously, half expecting some final plea or, even worse, a veiled accusation. But it wasn't either. It was a note. Simple. Thoughtful. Not long. He thanked me. For carrying myself with dignity. For not turning pain into poison. For standing in the face of mockery and never raising my voice. He said I reminded him of someone he used to be before life made him compromise too much of himself. There was nothing flirtatious about it. No suggestion of anything beyond that single night of truth. Just quiet admiration. And a line I'll never forget. You didn't say much, but you said everything. I read it twice. Then again. And then I framed it. Not because I wanted to hold on to him, but because I wanted to hold on to me. To that version of myself who refused to crumble, who walked out of a room full of people trained to laugh at her, and who didn't look back. The letter sits now on a small shelf in my apartment, next to the vintage brooch my grandmother gave me and a photo of her in the same dress I wore that day. It's not a shrine. It's not a revenge trophy. It's a quiet promise. To never go back to being invisible. I've been busy since the wedding. Life has taken a soft turn. Subtle, but meaningful. I started teaching again, a small weekly writing class for young women at the local library. Some are still in high school, others juggling jobs and college and dreams that feel too big. They come with notebooks and nervous hands, unsure if their voices are worth putting on paper. And I tell them every week that silence isn't strength unless you choose it. That shrinking is not the same as humility. That sometimes walking away is the loudest thing you can do. I tell them that not every story has to be pretty to be powerful. Today, one of the girls stayed after class. She looked around nervously, then said, "Your sister's wedding, that video clip went kind of viral. Everyone was talking about how classy you were." I blinked.